Now, the 9 o'clock news and campaign report with Peter Sissons.
Another big security alert and a warning from the government that there may be an IRA attempt to disrupt polling day itself. This time a terrorist bomb damages a pylon near a Midlands motorway, bringing widespread disruption. John Major says he'd leave politics rather than scrap the basic state pension, but Labour repeats the claim. And the documents behind what a judge called the clearly dishonest £1 billion bid for the co-op. Good evening. The Home Office today warned that the IRA may try to cause disruption next Thursday when the nation votes. And in an unprecedented move, all returning officers have been sent detailed guidance as to what they should do if individual polls cannot proceed as normal. The warning followed the third time in 8 days that terrorist action, today including an explosion near a Midlands motorway, caused transport chaos. Parts of the M6 and the M5 in the West Midlands and sections of the M1 and M18 in Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire and South Yorkshire were closed after the police received coded warnings. The explosion happened on the M6 close to junction 10A, where it links up with the M54 near Walsall. No one was hurt, but an electricity pylon nearby was damaged. There was heavy congestion in Birmingham when the Ring Road and the Aston Expressway was closed. Rail services were disrupted when New Street Station was shut down and evacuated. Further south, there was a security alert at Luton Airport, where a controlled explosion was carried out on a suspect package. Our Home Affairs correspondent Jon Silverman reports.
Another Friday, another IRA attack. 2 bombs damaged the concrete base of this electricity pylon close to junction 10A of the M6. Anti-terrorist officers concluded that it was a serious attempt to topple the structure onto the carriageway and cause casualties. There was a coded telephone warning, but the police say it was deliberately vague.
Police officers and members of the public could have been drawn much closer to the danger because of the impreciseness of the data we were given. But that's a tactic they've developed and is quite despicable.
As intended, the attack brought travel chaos. At the height of the rush hour, parts of the busiest motorway network in Europe and the express route into Birmingham were closed. Motorists displayed a mixture of stoicism and anger.
I reckon you ought to be stood up a wall and shot.
We've got about 10, maybe 12 mile, and it's pretty frustrating and all part of the experience, I suppose, but not good for the tourist, but bad for the common person.
Adding to the disruption, Birmingham's New Street Station was shut, causing serious problems for both mainline and local services.
Okay, can you move back, please?
The area around the station was cordoned off after a coded telephone warning. For good measure, the IRA hit air travellers too. Luton Airport was closed for 6 hours after another telephone warning. A controlled explosion was carried out on a suspect package. Security assessments indicate that the IRA is likely to intensify its mainland activity leading up to polling day next week. And while they've been concentrating on transport for the moment, the police are not discounting their capacity to cause a more spectacular outrage. Accordingly, special measures are being taken to safeguard the voting process. Voters are likely to be searched at many polling stations. And for the first time, the Home Office has issued specific security advice to returning officers. In extreme circumstances, they could adjourn the poll for up to 24 hours. The IRA has always posed a threat to democracy, though it's never disrupted a general election. The security agencies are hoping that vigilance will ensure that it doesn't succeed next week. Jon Silverman, BBC News at the Home Office.
In the election campaign, the political battle over pensions has intensified, with the Prime Minister angrily denying Labour claims that Conservative plans will mean the abolition of the state pension. Mr Major said the claims were disgraceful and said he'd rather quit politics than see the state pension ended. Our political editor Robin Oakley reports.
The Prime Minister was happy out on the campaign trail today.
Thank you very much.
But he was less than happy that yet again a day the Tories had planned to focus on the improving economy was hijacked by arguments over the complex Tory scheme to give the new generation of workers personal funded pensions from the year 2040. Labour say the scheme's full of holes, and they're sticking to their charge it amounts to abolition of the state pension.
They are abolishing the basic state pension. There is absolutely no doubt about their proposals. Contained in Basic Pension Plus, a technical note, it is to abolish the basic state pension, and they are replacing it with a privately managed scheme.
Tories argue it'll still be a state pension, with a government-guaranteed minimum backing what should be a much more generous payout from investments. And they're accusing Labour doorstep campaigners of frightening existing pensioners who won't be affected.
Do you approve of Labour canvassers going on the doorstep and telling existing pensioners that if the Tories get in, their pensions will be scrapped?
I said it is now up to the government to answer our questions as to which age groups are affected and what they mean when they say that older workers and older people can be brought into the scheme.
Robin, let me just come back in on this pension business. This is something they will do if they were to be re-elected. Therefore, it is entirely right that we scrutinise it carefully.
We all know the Tory canvassers are saying exactly what Robin's saying, that the pension is going to be abolished, and it isn't.
4 times they were asked, and 4 times they ignored the question. At the Tory conference, Mr Major's exasperation showed as he found himself facing a string of questions on how the Tory scheme would work and charges about Tory canvassers' tactics too.
Unbelievable. I can't believe what you just said. I find it just absolutely astonishing.
Politics, he said, was a rough old trade, but Labour's treatment of the pensions issue was a disgraceful abuse beyond anything he'd encountered in politics before. And the raw nerves of one nation Toryism showed as he said what he'd do if any right-wing Tory cabinet attempted to damage the state pension as Labour was suggesting.
I would not only leave Downing Street, I would leave politics, and I would call a general election. There's no question whatsoever that any Conservative cabinet would countenance proposals like this.
The Tories argue that under their pension scheme, no one will get less, and most should get a good deal more. But Labour, who've said they'll think the unthinkable when they get round to their plans for reforming the welfare state, were happy to continue raising on the doorstep an issue which they're content is playing well for them.
Is it going to be privatised like all everything else gets privatised if the Tories get in? What happens?
Well, I think you're right, you can't trust the Tories on pensions.
The Liberal Democrats have been producing their own pensions proposals today. At a charity for the elderly, their leader, Paddy Ashdown, guaranteed a universal state pension with a top-up linked to earnings for poorer pensioners. Earlier, he took the high moral tone about other parties' arguments.
I hope that by now we can get away from this campaign of reciprocated scaremongering and high explosive insults. What people want to know is not fear about what the other parties might or could do, but fact about what the parties that are standing in this election will do.
Mr Major's been genuinely angry about Labour's tactics on the pension question, dismissing it as the politics of crude fantasy. The Tories are all the more irritated because they were praised for their long-term thinking when they produced the proposals just before the election. But Labour say they're only doing the same on pensions as Mr Major's doing in his election broadcast tonight, accusing Tony Blair of being ready to sign up Britain to a federal Europe and to scrap all the union laws of the 1980s. 6 days to go, and it's getting scratchier all the time. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
State pensions have been linked to prices rather than average wages since 1980, so they don't benefit from the general increase in incomes. But as the number of older people increases, finding the best way of funding retirement will be a dilemma for whoever forms the next government. Our social affairs editor Niall Dickson examines who's right and who's wrong in the pensions debate.
At the centre of a row not of their making. For many of the more frail elderly, political games are remote and irrelevant. Some may have been worried by claims that their pension would be abolished or privatised, but at this age-concerned centre in Southwark, no one was taking it very seriously.
I don't think any of them know what they're doing.
Do you think you trust politicians with your pension?
No.
Why not?
I don't trust any of them with anything. They're all up there for themselves.
If you lost the little pension you do have, it would be very difficult for you, wouldn't it?
It would. Yeah, it would do. We'd have to starve.
You don't think that's likely to happen, do
Oh,
you?
no, I don't think so, no.
The Conservatives' plan is radical, and eventually it would mean the end of the state pension as we know it. But according to the Tories, pensioners of the future would be much better off as a result. It's targeted at young people joining the workforce. They would have to pay contributions towards their own private pension fund. The state would help by making contributions and by guaranteeing to pay the equivalent of today's basic pension should anyone's personal fund fail.
We would be very worried about how a government today, or even in a few years' time, could guarantee what its successor would do in 20 or 30 years.
But Labour have raised more immediate fears, claiming that the Conservatives are planning to extend their privatisation plan beyond today's young. They point to the government's own document, which says it might be possible to bring older people into the scheme at a later date if public finance is permitted. The Conservatives insist that does not mean today's old people would be affected, only that their scheme might start off with those in their 20s.
The idea that the people here could be included in the Conservative scheme is absurd. There's no way that they could build up a private pension fund, even if anyone wanted them to. So whoever's in power, today's pensioners will go on receiving the state retirement pension.
Yet for all their pious promises, what the politicians seldom mention is that the value of the basic pension is already slipping away. That makes a new structure inevitable.
All the main parties are accepting that the basic state pension will continue to wither away, that pension provision will increasingly be the role of the private individual rather than the state. The debates of the future will be about the level of compulsion in private provision and how much the state does for those at the bottom.
The key difference in Labour's proposal is that even for the next generation, they propose to keep the state pension as a foundation, albeit an increasingly limited one. The difficulty for all the politicians is that the pensioners of the future will certainly expect more than those of today. Niall Dickson, BBC News, South London.
That's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the programme. But now, the rest of the day's news. A High Court bombed the rebuilding of Manchester. Michael Buerk is in the northwest to report on its spirit of enterprise. But first, over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Peter. The Tories are returning to the subject of Europe for the final days of the campaign. It's an issue where they think they can score over Labour, and it's also an area which voters increasingly say is important, not least because of the Referendum Party's campaign. A damp night in Maidstone, and the Referendum Party rally isn't packing them in. But in some marginal seats in the south and southwest, it wouldn't take very many to vote Referendum Party to unseat a Conservative. The party's founder and leader tells them that a life with the benefits of European trade, but without Brussels, is possible.
Could we be a sovereign nation, part of a common trading market? But it exists. The system, the structure exists, functions, and functions well. It's called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA.
Sir James dismissed as tactical the surge of Eurosceptic Tory election addresses and described both Labour and Conservative promises of a referendum on a single currency as phony.
This Conservative government is not only not a party of nation, it has betrayed both the nation and the democratic process by surrendering sovereign rights which are lent to government by the people, and they have abused that loan and surrendered them without the people's consent.
Even Sir James's loyalists admit that their support is patchy, and in the areas where it's strongest, the Tories are telling the voters that they are the real referendum party, and all that stands between them and Eurofederalism. But Sir James launched his campaign in the southwest, where both fishermen and some farmers complain bitterly about Europe. Traditionally, it's the Liberal Democrats who challenge the Tories in the region, but they are often seen as the pro-Europe party.
Familiar faces on familiar territory.
Mary, nice to see you.
Paddy Ashdown gearing up supporters in Dorset today for the final crucial leg of this campaign. He's confident the pro-European Liberal Democrats won't lose votes to the Referendum Party, who are seeking to capitalise on the growing Euroscepticism here, particularly among farmers and fishermen.
The Liberal Democrats have been the Referendum Party represented in this Parliament and will be the only Referendum Party represented in the next Parliament too. We want to create a people's Europe, founded on the will of the people, not on the politicians. And that's why that referendum commitment is so important to the country, but also to the South West.
The picture postcard landscape of the South West is regarded as fertile ground by the Liberal Democrats. With its largely rural population, there's always been a sense of individuality here. This, plus a strong Methodist tradition and little history of trade unionism, have made it a place where liberalism has thrived. In 1974, the late David Penhaligon seized Truro from the Tories, a victory seen as the modern breakthrough. The party now has hundreds of councillors in the region, and a third of its top 50 targets are in the South West, where they currently hold 5 parliamentary seats.
I would hope that we could take all of Cornwall, where we're always been the runners-up to the Tories, where we haven't run it already, and also Devon and Somerset to increase our representation substantially.
But political experts in the region say that while such a breakthrough is possible, it's by no means guaranteed.
The worst scenario would be for them to simply hold what they got in 1992 or have difficulty in defending it. That is a Liberal Democrat nightmare.
For Paddy Ashdown, a great deal rests on his party's performance in the South West, and the final days of the campaign are firmly concentrated here with 2 big rallies. Party strategists know that if they can't pull it off here, their prospects nationally could be gloomy. Carolyn Quinn, BBC News, with the Ashdown campaign.
The row on the future of state pensions continued tonight. The Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Heseltine, told an audience in Nottingham that Labour had cynically played with the fears and emotions of the elderly and frail, and he made a strong attack on Tony Blair.
You stand for New Labour, you can keep it. You can stuff it back in all those smiling, glitzy sound bites that you've imported from the worst of transatlantic political campaigning. You are not fit to be leader of the Labour Party, and you are certainly not fit to be Prime Minister of this country.
Sinn Féin launched its election manifesto in Belfast today, denying any involvement in the disruption in the Midlands. The party refused to comment on reports that they'd done a deal with the IRA to guarantee a ceasefire in Northern Ireland during the campaign. Under the slogan, "A New Opportunity for Peace," the party president, Gerry Adams, said a vote for Sinn Féin would be a vote for peace. Labour set out its crime policy this morning, promising to put the victim at the heart of the criminal justice system. It also plans an overhaul of the Crown Prosecution Service and the youth justice system. But there were more accusations of scaremongering when Labour claimed that violent crime would continue to rise if the Tories were re-elected.
Their record speaks for itself, and Britain has become a much more violent society, and they have compounded that by, for example, their introduction of the Crown Prosecution Service, which has led to a huge fall in the number of people who've been charged with offences actually being pursued to the courts to the point of conviction.
John Major went to a safe Labour seat this afternoon and was overwhelmed by enthusiastic supporters. He was intending to visit a mosque, but the crowds were so dense he gave up. Mr Major got a taste of what it might have been like if he'd made it as a cricketer. But with his security men visibly unhappy, the visit to the mosque was abandoned. The Imran Khan treatment drove Mrs Major back to the battle bus, but Mr Major told an onlooker, "This is what politics is all about. I just love it." And that's it from us. Back to you, Peter.
And Perkins. We've been reporting the issues up and down the country throughout the campaign, and tonight for our final regional report, we're in the northwest. It's a diverse area spanning rural Lancashire, the urban centres of Greater Manchester and Merseyside, and more affluent Cheshire. Although traditional heavy industry has declined, manufacturing as a whole still accounts for more than a quarter of local income. Average unemployment at 6.7% is half of 1% above the national average. But there are sharp regional differences. Unemployment on Merseyside is still exceptionally high at 11.1%, but in Lancashire and Cheshire it's less than half that figure. The average salary is £330 a week, below the national average, but still better than most other regions outside the southeast. Michael Buerk is in Manchester.
Peter, what happens here in the second most populated region of the country after the southeast could well decide the fate of this election, even the future shape of British politics. History and a patchwork of economic success and failure has made politics a matter of almost tribal territory here. Some huge Conservative majorities cheek by jowl with massive Labour ones, and pockets of Liberal Democrats, particularly in the old textile towns. The key to next week's vote here is in how this, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, has coped with the Thatcher Revolution and the Tories' enterprise society. Our North of England correspondent Mike Mackay tells a tale of two cities.
It was the biggest explosion in Britain since the Second World War, an IRA attack on Manchester city centre last June, which destroyed more than 600 businesses, including Sue Blythe's sandwich shop in the Corn Exchange.
It's scary to think just how we all got away with our lives. The damage that's done. It's sad. Just sad to see the shop looking like that.
As the dust settled, she and her husband struggled for many months to find another shop for their business. With £30,000 from the Lord Mayor's Fund and some hefty loans, Sue and Bill Blythe recently celebrated their reopening at a new address.
Back in business. I've waited 7.5 months to do this, and I just want to show people that now you've given me the chance again, I'll show you what I can do. I'll make Manchester proud of me, because I'm proud of Manchester. It's where I want to be, it's where I want my business to be.
Pride is what Manchester's got plenty of these days. The present £63 million city centre facelift follows an ambitiously promoted bid for the Olympics. That failed, but the city did capture the Commonwealth Games for 2002 and money to build a new stadium. Success came too when Manchester Airport was given the go-ahead to build a second runway. It was a tough battle, but it was enterprise which won it, says Manchester, not luck.
You've got to make a difference for yourself. I think in life you generally do end up with what you deserve. And I think if you have people who are determined to make a difference, then those people can make a difference. I don't think Manchester's getting anything. I think Manchester deserves all of the investment that's coming here.
30 miles down the M62 in Liverpool, symbols of expanding enterprise are harder to find. This is a tale of two cities, Liverpool and Manchester, two old rivals, as it were, searching for new success. Manchester, with its aggressive self-promotion, looks to be ahead. Merseyside is striving to overcome an ideological and industrial past that still casts a very long shadow. 500 Liverpool dockers have been on strike for longer than the miners were in 1985. John Parry would once have been joined by thousands of fellow dockers. Mass redundancies ended all that.
People are losing the backbone to fight. You've got to have the backbone to fight, and we have. We will fight tooth and nail to get back inside those docks.
Liverpool's traditional militancy was exploited throughout the 80s as the far left fought for political control. Meanwhile, Manchester was adapting to a changing climate.
Manchester changed its spots 10 years ago and got on to the whole question of fixing up the city centre, getting the private sector in, being entrepreneurial, being European. Liverpool was a bit slow out of the starting blocks, but it has begun to make that change, and we're now recognising what we need to do. There's no doubt Manchester is ahead, but I think there's no doubt that we are beginning to do what is necessary to catch them up.
Generating new jobs isn't something normally associated with the church, but the Dean of Liverpool moves in where business angels fear to tread. By cajoling bankers and investors, the man they call Reverend Fix-It has become one of Liverpool's biggest property developers.
We might have started later in the race to regenerate, but I think we really are getting there now.
The Duke Street housing development next to the cathedral is just one of 8 projects worth £80 million in which the Dean has had an influential hand.
When we borrowed the 4.8 million from Barclays to start on the development down there, That was horrific. But when the Millennium Commission came and announced that they were going to give us 27 million, you just take it in your stride. But when you think that I have to find 27 million to match the 27 million the Millennium Commission have given us, yes, I do lie awake at night sometimes and think about it.
This is big stuff.
It's serious money. Yes, indeed.
Derek Walters clearly has faith in his city, a city whose poverty was highlighted in the famous Church of England report a decade ago. Whether Merseyside can sustain the long road back to recovery will surely be more than a simple question of faith.
Mike Mackay. Two great cities, both run by Labour, but for many people one, Liverpool, has come to symbolise old Labour. The other, Manchester, the new Labour of Tony Blair. The question for this election is how the transformation of the Labour Party will play in the marginal constituencies. Will it attract disaffected Tories? Will it put off die-hard socialists? Traditionally, Labour are strong across the northwest. After boundary changes, they have 44 seats. The Conservatives 25, and the Liberal Democrats are calculated to have just 1. If Labour nationally is to get the sort of majority the polls suggest they're heading for, then they have to take seats which have always been considered safe Tory territory, like South Ribble. I spent the day there. This is not John Major's idealised Middle England of thatched pubs and village greens. It's a place where Stokes Hall would be a high-density executive estate, not a mansion, more Brookside than Miss Marple. A spreading commuter land laced with light industry. South Ribble has cash in its pocket, is home-owning, house-proud and Tory.
I've never liked the Labour Party, the policies, you know, because they're generally a highly taxing party. Most of the time, I've found that through my life anyway. And I don't think there'll be any change now, no matter what they say.
People in this area see Labour in operation in Manchester and in Liverpool and north of here in Preston, and they don't like what they see. And I don't think they trust New Labour to be different from the Labour Party that they see operating in this area.
Once it was different. The main town, Leyland, meant lorries. As late as the 60s, it had the biggest truck manufacturer in the world, employing 28,000 people. Now it has the biggest truck museum. Leyland still exists, a fraction of its former size, but making money again. The reason? Japanese-style team working, flexible agreements, layers of management slashed from 7 to 2. These people supported the old Labour, but will they stay with the new?
We realise here how things were here a few years ago when backs were to the walls and we had to sort of fight to keep this place going. And we've done that. And I think if we'd have stuck to the old Labour ways, we wouldn't have done it. We just got wise.
We believe that South Ribble, along with the rest of the country, will have a new start.
And do you think New Labour is much more attractive to the voters of a place like South Ribble than Old Labour was?
Possibly. Yeah.
Runshaw College is the sort of place where the students have better cars than the staff. The candidates are here to debate. The students, like their parents, are pragmatic. Nobody suggests Labour has betrayed its socialist ideals. They want to know who will pay the biggest student grants. The Lib Dems hope to pick up disaffected Tories, but fear New Labour may appeal to them more.
Some people may be tempted, and I think if you're looking for a true alternative and to vote for something as opposed to not very much, then it has to be the Liberal Democrats.
This is Lancashire's new industrial revolution. South Ribble is the frozen American pizza capital of, if not the world, nor quite yet Europe, at least of Britain. 4,000 a minute for this country and most of the continent, excluding Italy. A business growing almost as fast as dough rises in a microwave. New ways of eating, new ways of working, new ways of thinking about them and us. But which party will benefit?
You don't really need a union. If you work for a firm that looks after the people, then you don't need a union.
So you're more inclined to vote for this Labour Party than you might have been for the old one?
Yes, certainly. Whether they fulfil the promises, well, that's to be seen, isn't it?
And there are 6 candidates standing in South Ribble. Here, more than anywhere else, the unknown factor is how far the striking social changes of the last few years will affect the way people will vote. The extent to which old class antagonisms don't seem to exist in successful new businesses. The way white-collar office jobs seem no more secure now than blue-collar ones. How far will new realities affect old loyalties? a question that will be answered next Thursday. Peter.
Thank you, Michael. And the main election headline tonight, John Major has said he'd leave politics rather than scrap the basic state pension. The Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown said the Conservatives were in near panic because Labour was telling the truth about pensions. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, joins me now. Robin, we heard Michael Heseltine going for Tony Blair tonight, even more heated, very personal. Why has this issue ignited the way it has?
Quite a few reasons, I think, Peter, really. One is that Labour have been determined to create a kind of fear factor about a Tory fifth term. They've been looking for an issue on which they can do that. They think they've expunged the old fear factor about Labour as a tax and spend party, looking for a way of getting at the Tories on that. And John Major is very resentful of any suggestion that he would do anything to weaken either the health service or the pension system. It really shows him up in his one nation Tory light and shows that he doesn't really hunt with the Tory right on these issues. But the other factor in it, of course, is that there's a quarter of the population are aged 55 or more. Grey power, as it's called, is a very potent electoral force, and they need the votes of those over 55-year-olds, particularly because many more of them turn out to vote than the younger age groups.
So it's into the last 5 days. What are we in for?
Well, we will see a lot from Labour over the next 5 days about creating a one-nation society. They will present themselves as the one-nation party, healing divisions in society, deliverable promises, harking back to things like class sizes, waiting lists in hospitals. The Tories, I think we will see reviving the issue of Europe a lot because they will present John Major as the best man to go to Amsterdam and negotiate. They'll talk about the Constitution and they'll try and get the focus on the economy. Every time they try and do that, some other story comes up and knocks it off. But Europe, they hope, will bring back their undecideds. Liberal Democrats will concentrate on health and education, practical issues, promises with bills attached, as they put it, for their pitch.
One aspect of the campaign that, perhaps rightly, we haven't drawn too much attention to is the high level of security surrounding the party leaders. What effect has that had on their individual campaigns and on them personally? Have you been able to assess that?
Not so much on them personally, but it does have a cramping effect on the campaign. And of course, one of the handicaps is that people can't signal their movements very far in advance. So it probably affects the kind of crowds who turn out. But we've always had the security aspect in elections. I remember an election back in 1970 when Ted Heath was told that at the other end of the country, Harold Wilson had been hit by an egg. And he said, oh, well, he was very sorry to hear that Mr. Wilson had been hit by an egg. But since Mr. Wilson's movements were being kept secret for security reasons, this just showed what a desperate state the nation was in, that people were walking about with eggs in their pockets merely on the off chance of encountering the Prime Minister.
Our party leaders must be exhausted by now.
Absolutely exhausted. The journalists covering them showing a fair measure of fatigue as well, I think, Peter. But stamina is the essential quality for a politician. They've really got to gear themselves up for these last 5 days because this is just the stage of a campaign where people can fall into mistakes, little slips. And the pattern of the polls with nothing moving yet could mean that everybody made their minds up 3 months ago, or it could mean that everything is to play for in the last 2 or 3 days of this campaign.
Robin Oakley, thank you. And that's the news tonight. Newsnight is on BBC 2 at 10:35. But from the 9 o'clock news, good night.